Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I take a look at the 2000 movie Red Planet. It has a 14% on the tomato meter and a 28% on the audience score. It is 100% rotten. There's no question about that. I'm not going to try to argue that it deserves more than a 28% on that audience score. I think that's fair. I remember seeing this when it came out, I believe, on home video, on VHS. And at the time, DVDs were still pretty new, so I hadn't gotten hold of those. So yeah, I saw this on a VHS tape, probably rented from Blockbuster. And I remember the only striking thing of this movie was that Carrie-Anne Moss had a shower scene. You know, the typical B-movie sci-fi trope where the one woman that's on the crew on the spaceship, you have to be introduced to her, in a shower scene of some kind. There's not total nudity, but it makes sure she also takes off her uniform and ties it around her waist so that she's in a t-shirt and you can see her ample cleavage. Today, Carrie-Anne Moss isn't considered a sex symbol. But at the time, I guess that's what they were going for because she was known for The Matrix, and I guess she was the hot thing at the time. But anyway, this thing's totally rotten. It tries to do everything a B movie tries to do in a Mission to Mars type B movie. There's nothing new to see here except it does have quite a budget to spend on the improbable and ridiculous convoluted science that it attempts to convince you is real. It wants you to take this ridiculous science as believable. The story of the plot is that humans have fouled up the Earth's environment, and so they have been sent to Mars to terraform it and to make it into a place where humans can move. So they'll have a new planet, I guess, to screw up, fresh land to screw up, I guess. In any case, the improbable part of this gets really bad right off the bat as it's revealed that they have successfully given Mars an atmosphere by seeding it with algae of some type. It gets worse from there. The astronauts are the worst group of astronauts that NASA could ever pick. They would fail every psych eval exam. They are played by Val Kilmer and Tom Sizemore and others that all end up getting killed off eventually. Val Kilmer and Carrie-Anne Moss end up having a romance that's kind of shoehorned in there and told to us with flashbacks. And in the end, the two of them kind of have a romantic, happy ending. It's completely ridiculous. There's a lot of stuff put into this movie to make it exciting and scary and thrilling all at the same time, but audiences mostly just walked away thinking it was stupid. And I kind of had the same feeling when I saw this on home video. So let's get right into the actual reviews and see what people in November of 2019 still think of this movie. Obviously, it's still relevant because we have new, fresh, exciting reviews on it. And we have a 2.5 star. It's really not as bad as some will make it out to be. Yeah, the thought is pretty unoriginal, but some of the effects are well done. Some of the CGI is dated, but it's not bad for its time. It's not bad if you're expecting a B movie and you're expecting to get it from Blockbuster and bring it back the next day after you rewound the VHS cassette, of course, because you don't want to get fined for that. I disagree on 2.5 stars. I say 2 stars. It peaks at 2 stars. It's got some interesting ideas. They're all done really science offensively in a scientific type of way. The science is kind of offensively bad. Even the biologist character played by Tom Sizemore, he even just outright mislabels things that he would know not to label incorrectly, and it's played off as he's giving you scientific information. It's really bad if you know even the most cursory biology, maybe biology from your last year of high school, first year of college. You'd laugh out loud at this biologist. So there's a lot of stuff like that in this, but if you were 12 or 13, it would pass right over your head as being believable somehow, I guess. Again, it must be made for teenagers because why would they spend so much time showing us Carrie-Anne Moss having a shower? I mean, come on. So let's move on. 3 stars. Finally watched this for Val Kilmer, obviously, and was surprised to find that The Martian basically was just a better made version of this film. Nearly every beat was the same, and that's not a bad thing. I disagree. The Martian was a completely different film. It has nothing to do with this. I don't know how it could be compared to this. It's like comparing an apple to a basketball. Yeah, they're both set on Mars, but that's where the similarities end. If anything, this is more of a fitting comparison to the movie that also came out in 2000 called Mission to Mars. There were 2 Mission to Mars type movies in the year 2000. Both of them are considered bad B movies. One of them had a slightly higher budget. That was Mission to Mars. This one, it's bad, but for different reasons than Mission to Mars. But I will have an episode of Rotten Reviews about Mission to Mars. A lot of people interchange those 2 movies in their memories, and a lot of people get confused between the 2 movies. So that might be why somebody's confusing this with The Martian. You know, it is sad, but almost every type of movie that's taken place on Mars has turned out to be a bad movie, except for perhaps the Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, but that's not really a movie. That was a TV adaptation, and it's a rather old one, so it doesn't hold up. In any case, let's move on. We have a 5-star review from February of 2019. I do not understand the fury against this film. The effects are extraordinary. The acting of the actors is excellent. The soundtrack is fantastic. All this hatred against this film is unjust. Well, if people do hate it, it's not really because of the actors. It's because it's the realism of it. The actors come across as frat boy rejects that would never be accepted by NASA, and yet they're put in charge of this mission. Um, the romance is unbelievable and forced and pointless. Carrie-Anne Moss didn't work as a sex symbol, so even the shower scene she had didn't really work that well. I wouldn't say it's so much fury as it's just the audience that paid to see this in the theater feels that their intelligence was insulted by a lot of it. And I could get that. I mean, if you had rented this for $2 on VHS, you wouldn't be quite as offended at it. But yeah, if you saw this in the theater, you paid money and like you were just treated as you were stupid. And that's probably why there's some hate out there. But again, now we're into 2018 reviews, so there shouldn't be too much hate on this. We'll see what we find. 3.5 stars. Red Planet came out when there was a rush for Mars films. There was also De Palma's Mission to Mars, released the same year. This is a decent film featuring some good actors and fine special effect, but the plot is bare. A group of scientists head to the Red Planet and something goes awfully wrong and they are stranded. Then it is a matter of time and life and death. I won't spoil anything for you, but this is one of those in-flight movie type of films that you watch and forget. Yeah, but it is memorable for one part where the astronauts, they're first when they find out they're stranded on the surface of Mars and that their oxygen is running out. They are suffocating kind of quite long and excruciatingly in their spacesuits as they run out of air. It is Val Kilmer's character who finally just for whatever reason decides to open his visor on his helmet to, like, I don't know what he's trying to do, like put himself out of his misery maybe, and he gasps for air, and then suddenly, surprise, surprise, Mars has air. It turns out that their previous attempts to give Mars an atmosphere by putting algae there of a certain type, it has now restored the atmosphere on Mars to the point that humans can breathe it just fine. It's not only an insult to the intelligence, but it's kind of stupid because their spacesuits, their instrumentation, and a lot of instrumentation is nicely shown that the astronauts have with them, and yet there's no instrumentation that told them that there's actually a breathable atmosphere there. It's pretty, like, plot holy in a way, and it's kind of, again, insulting the audience's intelligence to give them a cheap plot twist or a thrill. It's kind of offensive. So anyway, 3 stars. Red Planet came out when there was okay, I read that one. 5 stars. These reviews make 0 sense. This movie was damn good. Don't listen to those bad reviews. The only one review who was right was Roger Ebert, who gave this a 3 out of 4 stars. I would agree with that. Actually, you might even give it a 3.5 stars. Sometimes I just don't understand the ratings of these movies. The intelligence level of the audience is just insulted by the movie. Only if you're 12 or 13 would you think that it's passable. It wants you to take everything so seriously and so life and death seriously, and yet it insults your intelligence about all the science involved. 2 stars. Effects driven sci fi is one big yawn from start to finish. Nah, I disagree. I wouldn't say that it's boring. It's just like not a believable story. 2 stars were in June of 2016. The story behind this one was that humans had polluted the earth so much that we had to look for another place to live. Attempts to terraform Mars began, and the first manned crew to Mars rockets there to check the progress and stay on the planet. Things go wrong and the film becomes a pseudo Apollo 13 on Mars. Not as much of a sci-fi action flick as much as this could really happen flick. There are a few action sequences that were exciting, but a few of the characters were really unnecessary. Yeah, there's like conflict between characters that's kind of, it's ginned up for the sake of having something happen in the plot. And from what I understand, behind the scenes, Tom Sizemore and Val Kilmer really hated each other's guts and were on the point of coming to blows. And so you can tell somewhat that when they had scenes together, they used a double and they took turns filming the scene because they just physically could not sit close to each other without coming to physical fight with each other because they just hated each other so much. And it kind of made the scenes with them together kind of strange, where if you watch, you'll see that they're never actually together at the same time. The camera goes A and B back and forth between them because they weren't actually together in the same scene. It's kind of a funny little backstory to that. Um, there were a lot of problems with the production of it, and they had like a robot was thrown into the mix, and the story on the robot is that it had military programming and it was damaged during its crash on Mars, and so that put like a villain type of element into the story because otherwise the story didn't have a villain to it. The astronauts were stranded on Mars, and yeah, they were douchebags, but they weren't actually villains, and so the story needed a villain to appear. So they put the robot in there as a villain. And again, when you're watching this, at least on home video, and have time to think about it, you can tell that the robot was put in there to be the villain just because they needed one in the story, and it kind of drew you out of the believability. So there's that too. That's why it fails. 3 stars, big blueprint for the far superior The Martian, but decent enough to watch if there's nothing else on. Again, those are totally different type of movies. The Martian is not supposed to be an action thriller. It's not. It's not. It doesn't have a villain, for example. This movie is a complete B movie trope. It has a romance, a villain, bad guys, good guys, etc. People getting killed and killing each other. The Martian is a totally different thing, has nothing to do with this. So please stop comparing it to that. 3 stars. In 2056 AD, Earth is in ecologic crisis as a consequence of pollution and overpopulation. Blah, 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 blah. See, this is all tells us nothing because in this story, it doesn't really matter why the humans went to Mars. It could be for any reason. It could be just to collect rock samples or whatever. The point of the movie is that they're stranded there. So even going through the motions to say that there's like this ecological reason for them going is kind of a waste of footage in the film. That's another reason why it fails. It wasn't necessary to anything that happens in the story. The story didn't need it. They could have spent more time and footage doing something else with the characters or with something cool, even just showing better scenery on Mars. Instead, it's like wasted its time trying to give you a reason why the astronauts went there. It doesn't need to have a reason. It's a bad decision on the part of the script. 5 stars. This movie should have had higher ratings. It is very similar to The Martian. No, it's not. I have seen it about 3 times and thoroughly enjoyed it. It's not similar to The Martian. Who is convincing these people? Did they even watch The Martian? I don't think they did. Did they just see the box cover or poster for The Martian and then think this is similar? No, they're both set on Mars. Otherwise, what do they think is similar about these? There is nothing similar to these. Nothing. 1 star. Some interesting ideas, but really it played out about as well as a poorly written and conceived sci-fi comic book story. Yeah, exactly. 100% agree. 1 star. With a fine cast and good special effects, you'd think they'd spring for a decently written script. Nope, and I completely agree. The script is bad, and it doesn't work, and it's trying to do all this stuff, and even the romance part, it fails. The casting failed. You convince us that all these NASA astronauts are douchebags and they don't deserve to be NASA astronauts, so we just can't believe in anything that's happening here. Right off the bat, I should mention in the plot, right off the bat, they're not stranded on Mars more than like 5 minutes, if that, and already one of the characters murders another. Really? So these guys, they're just straight up psychopaths, just under a little bit of stress. This isn't believable in any way that these are NASA astronauts. 2 stars. I've watched a lot of movies about Mars. This wasn't among the best. Yeah, that's an understatement. 1/2 star. So bad, this is a quickly put together movie plagiarizing the novel The Martian by Andy Weir. The Martian is one of the best science fiction books I have read. I only hope this is not the only attempt to turn a great novel into a movie. Val Kilmer, you are off the Christmas card list for this one. Now, this is a review from January of 2015, and I don't recall when the movie The Martian was released. But again, if that was from the book The Martian, okay. But I don't see anything similar between this and the movie with Matt Damon, The Martian. If they're just talking about a book that has a different story, okay, because this is not anything like The Martian, the movie. 1 star, November of 2014. The only thing that really interested me in this movie was the special effects, because outside of that, this is a very laughable and uninteresting few hours with these astronauts. And yeah, it's hours. This is over 2 hours, so it's like too long, definitely, for what it's trying to do. 1.5 star. Due to the recent Rotten Tomato changes that are basically, okay, I've seen this before. 3 stars. It's not some sort of masterpiece and far, far from it, but Red Planet is a fun movie, 56 out of 100. It's only fun if you're like 12 or 13, really. 4 stars. Mankind just isn't ready to recolonize to Mars. Too much fire and not enough oxygen. Not sure what that has to do with the movie. 1/2 star. One of the biggest wastes of time and money. Yeah, again, I don't know. If the movie was profitable, maybe it wasn't. I haven't looked up whether or not this actually made a profit at the box office. 1 star, pointless and ridiculous. 2 stars, official, better than extremely loud and incredibly close seal. More like a Netflix movie. Yeah, this is a workable Netflix movie. Of course, Netflix wasn't around in 2000, but it's still a workable Netflix. It's something that would be on par with a made-for-Netflix thing. But, if it were made today, the production budget would be a little bit higher. But yeah, it fits the stereotypical Netflix movie. 3 stars. Red Planet is not a bad movie, but it does disappoint. It started really good, and it was cool to see Amy's role in the movie, but they rushed through the most important thing in the movie, the living creatures they find on the planet. Why? This was a huge weakness to me. The acting was good enough, but not incredible in any way. Well, okay, Amy's the robot, the military robot that kind of becomes the evil thing in the movie. This reviewer is kind of way off base because, the most unrealistic and worthless parts of the movie were the alien creatures, which were simply like microorganisms that the astronauts had brought to Mars on previous missions that happened before this movie's mission. They were like misclassified by the biologist, and they were stupid and nonsensical and not believable. And again, an attempt to just have a plot device that was attempting like to scare the audience, to give the tension, to make the tension higher. It was just stupid. And, they spent too much time on that, so I completely disagree. They actually brought the movie down. 5 stars. Don't know why this movie did so poorly. As a scientist, this movie was very entertaining, and I have promoted this movie to no end. Not for the dull, institutionalized, or liberals, just not smart enough to enjoy the marvelous creativity. Well, I don't know what kind of scientist would promote this because the science in this movie is laughably, insultingly bad. So I'm going to leave that there. 3.5 stars. Though it isn't the best sci-fi film that I've seen, it certainly isn't the worst. The action is great and the story is good and original, so I can't really complain. Uh, no. The original, no. This has been done so many times in so many movies, and it's just all tropes, basically. 2 stars. A little sci-fi movie, well shot and quite nice to look at, but nothing here is new or surprising. It's a total Netflix. Well, yeah, you would think that this was a Netflix movie, but I'm sorry, this was a big budget mainstream Hollywood movie produced in the year 2000, and it's like this reviewer didn't know that, and maybe he didn't. Still gave it 2 stars, though. 3 stars. Nice sets, atmosphere, and a lot of good potential, but stale, hollow characters and slow pacing makes this film rather hard to enjoy. There's a lot of cool scenes and a few thrilling moments, but it still gets too slow and bland from time to time, and the film never seems to get off on anywhere. It's like I've read this one before, and it doesn't really tell me anything, so I'm going to move on. 2 stars, a very forgettable sci-fi that has a very good cast. 2.5 stars, probably one of the last movies I remember Val Kilmer and Tom Sizemore starring in. It's actually fairly good. I would say no, unless you're 13 or 12. 4 stars. To my biggest surprise, RottenTomatoes.com rated this movie only at 14%. I really have no idea why, but let me give you my perspective. I'm a hardcore fan of science fiction, and any movie that takes a serious leap into the unknown, I personally feel should be given the leverage of doing something new and creative. For The Red Planet, the storyline was decent enough to keep my attention captured. The production and the effects were pretty good. Well, I disagree. 3.5 stars. I actually kind of like this one. Throw logic out the window and enjoy it for what it is, a suspenseful and visually appealing thriller. Well, if you throw logic out the window, it kind of defeats the science part of science fiction, making it a fail. 2 stars. Wow, could have been good, ended up being so bad. 1 star. What's with all the Mars-based movies sucking? With the exception of Rocket Man, the plot is as watery thin as Mars' surface itself, the acting is as dry as the planet's atmosphere, and above all, that this is the most scientifically inaccurate film in the history of science-based films. The inaccuracies are so bad, NASA refused to be a technical advisor on the film. Do yourself a favor and spend an hour and 46 minutes of your life watching something else instead of this piece of crap. Yeah, again, the science, it's not science fiction. It's like a 13-year-old's version of science and science fiction. 1 star. With absurdity as its premise and laziness surrounding its script, Red Planet fails to reach any big climactic heights and also fails to provide much entertainment. Poor performances aren't necessarily the actors' faults because the script is incredibly poor, with a plot line that is almost mockable. Actually, it is kind of the actors' faults because 2 of the actors were busy actually fighting each other during the production, and professionals that have these high salaries should be better than that, but they weren't better than that. 2 stars. It had its interesting moments. You will get annoyed after hearing the word algae for the 100th time. 3 stars. Not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. Way better than Mission to Mars, that's for sure. Suffers from a simplistic plot and some wooden stereotypical characters, but the premise is solid and the effects were well done. Definitely worth a watch for sci-fi fans. Only if you're 12 or 13. 4 stars. Fun, gorgeous, and packed with talent. Lost on audiences without appreciation for deliberate pacing. I disagree. And the only gorgeous thing to me in this movie is they showed some cool, like, I don't know what you call it, fabric, like science fiction technology, where the astronauts could roll out this film-like fabric, and it was like a view screen with a computer display, like almost like a tablet that was made out of a rollable, scrollable film-like fabric. And that was pretty cool, and it was well done the way it was used, and it was inventive, and it was gorgeous. That was the best part of this. Too bad the rest of the movie wasn't like that. That was just one small part of it, and it was like irrelevant to the plot. But it was the only bright spot in this, in my opinion. But moving on. 1 star. So I'm watching the ending now with Val Kill. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to give anything away, or do I? Do I even care? Is this movie even worth the trouble of giving away the ending to of... I don't know how to end that sentence. Okay, so that Matrix chickie is in this movie. What's her? Carrie-Anne Moss? That's it. So she's in sexy space outfits inside of lots of tunnels and various rooms with views of space outside the windows for the majority of this movie. I think that was probably my favorite part. Yeah, they were really trying to make Carrie-Anne Moss a sex symbol or a sex star in this movie. I think that was bad because that's not what she was. She just wasn't like that, and she didn't go on to have that type of career. But they really tried in this. It was like a vehicle to try to present her as America's next Hollywood sex symbol. It didn't work. 3.5 stars. Interesting to think that we could go to Mars someday. Really, and that's why this deserves 3.5 stars. It is unfortunate that all the sci-fi that's set on Mars, at least in the last 30 years, is pretty bad. But then again, people really did like The Martian with Matt Damon, but it's quite not, it's definitely not your classic sci-fi adventure movie. It is like apart from the genre in a way, but it was enjoyable for a lot of people. Again, no big blockbusters, no exciting, big Terminator 2 type movies set on Mars, nothing with Academy Awards set on Mars. It is kind of unfortunate, but then again, we've had nothing but failed attempts at making a movie that takes place on the moon as well. So I don't know what it is. It's just maybe our own solar system is just too close to reality for people to have much of an imagination to do anything with. All the successful sci-fi franchises and successful sci-fi movies take place either in a far distant world or a fantasy world that's far and apart from our own in a different galaxy. Yeah, it is interesting to ponder that, why that would be. But in any case, this deserves both of its rotten scores. It's not worth watching even once, unless you want to try to watch a failed attempt at Hollywood to make Carrie-Anne Moss as a sexy Hollywood star. It failed, spoiler alert. So I will see you all again on the next edition of Rotten Reviews.